Yeah, it gets worse. So I've already made 2 videos on this matter. First one titled Microsoft and Xbox Baffle Internet After Shutting Down Hi-Fi Rush Developer and 3 other Bethesda Studios. The other one is called Microsoft and Xbox Reports Reveal Reckless Activision Blizzard Acquisition and Failing Game Pass Gamble, where I kind of delve further into why Microsoft and Xbox made the decisions that they did recently. As you can tell from both of these first frames of each video, I'm just so disappointed at how things are playing out at Xbox right now. So Tango Gameworks has been shut down. The folks who brought you the beloved Hi-Fi Rush, the award-winning Hi-Fi Rush. Now, one neat thing that we're seeing is that this game is being positively review-bombed, if you will. A lot of people just coming in to show their support amidst these unfortunate times for Hi-Fi Rush. You can see positive reviews skyrocket recently in light of the news. I mean, look at the over 22,000 overwhelmingly positive review score for this game. How do you frickin' shut down the studio that made results like this happen? Even now, former developers are expressing their frustration. Here is Kazuaki Igashira, game project manager at Tango Gameworks, saying not enough, showing photos of all of the awards that Hi-Fi Rush has won. And then Arcane Austin, they worked on Dishonored, they made Prey, renowned games. Redfall was kind of their downfall, but it didn't mean that they didn't have the potential to work on other amazing, awesome stuff. And it's just all really shocking after Microsoft straight up said that they're not planning to shut down Arcane Austin after Redfall's failure. And they straight up touted that Hi-Fi Rush was a breakout hit and how they couldn't be happier with how Hi-Fi Rush performed critically and commercially. Phil Spencer had talked about how he doesn't want to push against creative aspirations. And all of these promises were made, assuring that Xbox and Microsoft, with the acquisition of all of these studios, from the ZeniMax stuff to Activision Blizzard to the studios within their own Xbox games house, would be nurtured for the long term, that they'd be allowed creative autonomy and they'd be encouraged to have sort of that kind of creative freedom to make the stuff that they want to make. And now all of that is endowed with the shutdown of Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin, both of who have produced award-winning games. We've already seen some of what Microsoft has said to employees and to the public. Matt Booty talked about prioritizing high-impact titles, referring to the stuff that sells like tens of millions of copies, your Elder Scrolls and Fallouts. But the stuff that only sells a couple million copies, that is just no longer as viable as it once was. We have seen dumb shit said behind the scenes, like how Matt Booty's saying we need smaller games that give us prestige and awards, when that's precisely what Tango Gameworks gave you with Hi-Fi Rush. And so you proceed to shut down the studio that made you precisely what you desire. What the hell? Bloomberg reported that during a town hall meeting, Matt Booty and ZeniMax executives said that they were just spread too thin, that the acquisition of all of these studios was just too much to handle, which then begs the question, why the hell do you acquire all of these studios? Why'd you go on a spending spree and chew on more than you could swallow? You've continuously said that you're buying all of these studios because you can handle it and you want to nurture all of them. And now we're learning that whoopsie daisies, turns out that we miscalculated. Just reckless and irresponsible. Just the entire Xbox grand plan is falling apart as Game Pass subscribers slow down, as console sales are lackluster, as game launches are delayed, and as we're starting to see Xbox essentially try to release their games multi-platform. They're even considering Hellblade 2 for a PlayStation 5 release at some point. And with articles like this one released by Video Games Chronicles, as well as posts like this from Brad Hildebrand, former Microsoft/EA guy, we kind of got a glimpse into why exactly things are playing out the way they are. Basically, it's got to do with Game Pass not growing enough at a rapid enough pace to be able to compensate for the $70 billion that Microsoft spent on Activision Blizzard, and to be able to compensate for the fact that with that acquisition, the Xbox division has grown significantly. It is a big expense now to run this segment of Microsoft because it's got all of these studios now that they have to juggle and spend money and resources and manpower on to produce games that they hope will generate revenue. Game Pass was supposed to make up for a lot of that, but with the growth of subscription numbers on that front basically coming to a screeching halt and not showing the growth that it needs to have to be able to support endeavors in a way where investors would be happy and Microsoft executives would be happy, Microsoft is essentially forcing Xbox to make cuts, and that means that the smaller studios that are not making, Fallout and Elder Scrolls levels of games that, are at that scale or perform commercially at that level, but are more creatively driven and drive interesting ideas and push the boundaries of what you can do with gaming forward. Those are the studios that are in danger right now. Now, I've already highlighted some of the dumb and useless responses that Xbox and Microsoft executives have been putting out there. Here we have another one. So Xbox president Sarah Bond recently did an interview with Bloomberg. This was after the studio shutdowns, the closing of Tango Gameworks and of Arcane Austin. And so naturally, questions surrounding that were going to come up, and Sarah Bond just seems ill-prepared to answer those questions. I'd like to show you how she responded to those questions. Looking at the likes to dislikes ratio, this already hints at what you can expect. So here we go.
Related to some of the trends you're identifying, earlier this week, Xbox announced the shuttering of 4 game studios. I know you're not the studio's chief, but how should gamers understand that move in terms of Microsoft's commitment to developing innovative exclusive games?
Yeah,
good question.
It's always extraordinarily hard when you have to make decisions like that. I'll go back to what I was saying about the industry. And when we looked at those fundamental trends, we feel a deep responsibility to ensure that the games we make, the devices we build, the services that we offer are there through moments, even when the industry isn't growing and when you're through a time of transition.
So then why did you shutter the studios that make you those games? Like, this is all just so self-contradictory and also just a whole lot of nothing. And this is just the first segment of this disaster of a response.
And the news we announced earlier this week is an outcome of that. And our commitment to make sure that the business is healthy for the long term.
The way you establish a healthy business for the long term of a game publishing company is to nurture studios. What you're doing right now is a short-term solution. Shutting down Tango Gameworks and shutting down Arcane Austin, that is not executives looking long-term. That is them going, we need to make our financial books look good now, so we need to do something about this now. Let's cut the potential of these studios, their future potential to make us amazing games that in the long run may make us a lot more money than if we hadn't shut them down, be damned. She continues.
But that said, our commitment to having our own studios and working with partners to have games large and small, we're a platform where you can play GTA, but you can also play Power World, where you can play Call of Duty, and you can also play Pentiment. That doesn't change.
It's, again, so self-contradictory. You talk about commitment to smaller and bigger games and the long-term health of Xbox and the games and the studios and whatever. None of that is served by the shutdown of Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin. Doing that just sends the complete opposite message.
And frankly, our commitment to Bethesda and the role that it plays is part of Xbox and everything we do. It's actually been pretty fantastic. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to check it out. The Fallout TV show was on Amazon, and it's been great to see people fall in love with that universe, but also what it's done for the games themselves.
Randomly bring up the Fallout TV show. Why? That has nothing to do with the question that was raised. Let me once again remind you what the question was.
How should gamers understand that move in terms of Microsoft's commitment to developing innovative exclusive games?
In terms of developing innovative exclusive games was the question. And the smaller studios tend to be the ones who innovate because the larger studios have to produce those big AAA games that, have to meet certain trends so that they can achieve certain financial standards and performance. The smaller studios, they're the ones who can kind of experiment and see what works and what doesn't. And the whole point of Xbox and Microsoft's acquisitions was to let those smaller developers cook and kind of get really creative, go kind of almost like the indie way of making games, and then see what sticks and what doesn't, and allow them to be nurtured in such a way where over the long term they can find an identity and output stuff that will eventually click so hard that it'll take off, which is how some of the most successful studios right now have operated. It's how FromSoft sort of fostered the Soulsborne genre. It's how Larian Studios with Baldur's Gate 3 knocked it out of the park with a mega hit. That was a long buildup of trial and error and nurturing. That was the kind of treatment that Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin deserved, and it's the kind of treatment that was promised. And so, like, bring up Bethesda, likely referring to Bethesda Game Studios and the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series, which are the studios and games and IPs that are not in danger amidst this move. When asked about the more sort of innovative studios, like what does this say about those studios when you're shutting them down? And then bring up the Fallout TV show out of the blue, like what? This response just leaves such a bad taste, and it also just doesn't really answer the question. Anyway, Sarah Bond continues.
The Fallout TV show was on Amazon. And it's been great to see people fall in love with that universe, but also what it's done for the games themselves and people going back and exploring everything that's inside of that. There's some other great things that are coming from our studios later this year. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I was a big indie fan growing up. Looks like you were too. So you should check that out. But really right now for us and our teams, our focus is on the people impacted, and doing everything that we can do to help them through this hard transition.
I think one of the things that was most upsetting both to Xbox gamers and to employees is that, one of the shuttered studios in particular just created a hit game, did really well on Game Pass in terms of engagement, and won a ton of awards. Shouldn't succeeding in that way ensure the future of a studio?
The answer should be yes.
One of the things I really love about the games industry is it's a creative art form. And it means that the situation and what success is for each game and studio is also really unique. Like there's no one size fits all to it for us.
So what is and isn't success within Microsoft and Xbox is a guessing game. There are no parameters as to what's considered success. What guarantees that you won't be axed? Again, Hi-Fi Rush not only won awards and was played by over like 3 million players, which is a pretty decent figure. Xbox's own executives came out and said that it was a runaway hit and they couldn't be more pleased with how the game did. Like, if that isn't success, if that doesn't guarantee you a place in the future of Xbox, then all of the other developers are probably wondering, what the hell are we doing here, and what the hell is the purpose of us working so hard on our games when it's such a guessing game as to whether our good work will be rewarded or not, as to whether our work will, guarantee just the most basic modicum of respect of allowing us to continue to do more of the good work that we've been doing. Just this response, if there's no one size fits all, that's just going to generate more concern and more fear within Xbox's studios, who are looking at this and going like, I'm getting nothing from this. Like, I don't know what I have to do to earn my spot here at Xbox, and I don't know what I have to do to not get my studio shut down when even our best work isn't enough. This nonsense continues with this.
And so we look at each studio, each game team, and we look at a whole variety of factors when we're faced with sort of making decisions and trade-offs like that. But it all comes back to our long-term commitment to the games we create, the devices we build, the services, and ensuring that we're setting ourselves up to be able to deliver on those promises.
To deliver on those promises. That is, that's a fascinating statement to make when it was not long ago that you promised this. And not just Sarah Bond, but also Phil Spencer and folks within Xbox had this to say in Chapter 6 of this, the Story of Xbox documentary released 2 years ago, back in December 13th, 2021, or over 2 years ago. Here's what they said back then.
One of the biggest missteps that we learned from in the past was Lionhead. We acquired Lionhead in 2006, shut it down in 2016. A couple years later, we reflected back on that experience. What did we learn? How do we not repeat our same mistakes?
You acquire a studio for what they're great at now, and your job is to help them accelerate how they do what they do, not them accelerate what you do.
I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. And now what we're saying is, well, there are a variety of factors, and she doesn't really specify what those factors are, just a very non-response answer. And then, but we're committed to the long-term, yada, yada, yada. Again, very self-contradictory, not a whole lot of substance or response. Nothing here that really explains what the hell is going on. Now, what really is going on is because Xbox as a division has ramped up so much because of the $70 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard, that they not only have to make back to fill the $70 billion hole, but also now they're operating on a much larger scale because they have Activision Blizzard to manage. That's recurrent expenses combined with expenses for ZeniMax, combined with expenses for Xbox Studios. And so the floor of what successful is gets raised significantly because you have to make more money to make up for the recent expenses and the fact that it's a bigger company operating under significantly more costs. So what was successful before may not be successful now. Before the Activision Blizzard acquisition, smaller studios' games didn't have to become so successful that they have to significantly contribute to making back that $70 billion and helping maintain the recent acquisitions. But now, something like Hi-Fi Rush and its sales figures and its financial results don't contribute anywhere near as much to the company. It makes a smaller dent now in terms of trying to get that return on investment because the company scaled to such a significantly higher degree. And Microsoft is now looking at Xbox as not just some rounding error, but now as a significant division that put $70 billion of Microsoft's money into something that now has to make that money back and then some, also has to profit. And Hi-Fi Rush and games like it and studios who make games like that just don't contribute to the degree that they need to kind of ramp up with that kind of scale. And again, because Game Pass has stalled in terms of subscriber growth, it's not contributing enough to allow the smaller developers to kind of get away with not selling, Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Call of Duty numbers. And so again, it's that combination of the miscalculations surrounding how much Xbox Game Pass would grow throughout the years and how much and how recklessly they spent on that Activision Blizzard acquisition. There's also this perfectly timed shot in this interview. Check this out.
At each studio, each game team, and we look at a whole variety of factors when we're faced with sort of making decisions and trade-offs.
As she's answering this question, you can see a graph here that highlights that Xbox kind of grew for a while, but now you can see that growth decline. What investors need to see is growth. They want their investments to grow. It's the reason that they invest in a company like Microsoft so that they can make money off of Microsoft. And Microsoft, thinking in very corporate terms, are looking at it in the perspective of we need to make cuts so that in our books, this all looks financially better to investors. And so kind of cutting out things like Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin will help mitigate some of the kind of negative outlook that the $70 billion hole and Xbox not profiting as much from Game Pass and all these things might give. As highlighted by Bloomberg here, if it wasn't for the Activision Blizzard acquisition and the additional revenue that brought, without sales from that deal, Xbox gaming revenue would have been down approximately 5% year over year. So Xbox as a gaming division just isn't growing. It's just not performing as it should, which is why there's so many considerations for cutting studios and also going multi-platform and just this huge shift in strategy from what Phil Spencer had in mind. But you can tell here that Sarah Bond is just answering in the vaguest terms possible. She doesn't really even seem to know what to say or is restricted in what she's allowed to say. So she gave almost like the most politician answer ever, where you answer a question through a bunch of mumbo jumbo that when you think about it, you're like, wait, you actually said nothing with all those words. That's kind of what happened here. And it's precisely the kind of PR that Xbox doesn't need at this point. They need to have some kind of clear response, some kind of clear plans that they can present, but they seem to be at a loss right now, and they just seem to be trying to weather the storm without much in the way of good excuses and good justifications for this move, because honestly, there are no good justifications other than we did this for the investors. We did this because Microsoft executives wanted to make the financial numbers look good for the investors. And that's a really shitty reason. So of course, they aren't just outright saying that, even though that is ultimately the reality. This was just a corporate move. This was just a capitalistic move. You can see right here the kind of backlash that this interview segment has been getting. People saying things like, no disrespect to Sarah here, but her answer doesn't remotely address any of the good and valid questions presented by Dina. Nothing in the response gives any sort of justification in shutting down Tango. Not only does it not address the question, it literally just doesn't say anything. It's like they gave her a few key points that she just has to repeat and utter over and over again when asked that question, just like some pre-cooked answers, pre-cooked corporate responses. Liana Rupert pointed out aptly, that was a lot of words to say nothing. I don't understand what point they're trying to make when the metrics are very clearly visible. Like literally behind them, you can see the graph that shows the lack of growth for Xbox that has necessitated on a corporate level cutting costs. Responded with no answer, basically avoiding the question. Did not address the question directly at all. Shake my head. Like everyone's recognizing, flat out mocking and ridiculing just how pathetic that answer was. And some of the responses that are going viral include the way that behind these two people, you can see the graph that explains exactly what Sarah Bond refuses to say or isn't allowed to say, just perfectly framed by Bloomberg. So good job to Bloomberg on that front. Don't listen to her, says this tweet. Just look at this graph. That's the answer to every question about this baffling decision. 25,000 likes. Somebody highlighting the timestamp to go to that bit, 30,000 likes. I mean, that's kind of what people are talking about right now. And yeah, I mean, you can see how many quote tweets there are on Twitter right now and how many of them are going viral, how many people are talking about this and have watched this clip and have expressed bafflement and disappointment and anger and frustration that Microsoft and Xbox seem so ill-prepared to answer questions when, you know, Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin and the people affected deserve proper responses. And so you got a clip here that has garnered, you know, almost 15 million views in hours. Now, one last thing I'd like to present before I close out this video is IGN's report on sources who they talked to who are apparently longtime former Xbox employees. IGN spoke to two of them separately. Both lamented the current state of the business, and one of them had this to say: I had lengthy conversations with a bunch of Xbox founders, and we all came to the same conclusion. It's no longer Xbox, but Microsoft Gaming. Oof. Xbox and Phil Spencer's grand vision of it has lost its identity, and it's now Satya Nadella and Microsoft taking over now that they have a lot more riding on Xbox succeeding and kind of infusing their own mandates into it. One of the sources made it a point to highlight that these decisions probably aren't being made by Phil Spencer. It is all getting dictated by Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella and Microsoft CFO Amy Hood, and it all stems from the Activision acquisition. But that doesn't mean that Phil Spencer should just get a pass, because ultimately, under Phil Spencer's leadership, there's a lot that Xbox was aiming for, a lot of promises that they were made with good intentions, I believe, that ultimately were not fulfilled. The results are the results, and Phil often just did not deliver, and he over-gambled on Game Pass and then dedicated too much of the Activision Blizzard acquisition that ultimately ended up fucking over a lot of these smaller studios, in combination with the failed gamble on Game Pass and the direction that Phil Spencer took the Xbox gaming division has kind of culminated to this moment where Microsoft is now mandating and taking over. Somebody else made it a point to highlight that Microsoft has spread itself too thin. It's actually crazy when you look at the context of how Xbox 360 launched with a few hundred people. Last I heard, Xbox is now almost 30,000 people. They were just thinking about the spending part and not about the responsibilities that come with that. One of IGN's sources actually discussed the potential mindset of what they were thinking with the Activision Blizzard acquisition, stating, quote, the situation Xbox was in when they made this call was much different. They couldn't keep consoles in stock, making money hand over fist with Game Pass growth. The Activision acquisition seemed like a no-brainer. Now, console sales are down all of a sudden, post-COVID recession's happening, Game Pass is slowing. The acquisition was more costly and time-consuming than anyone expected, and the focus on fighting the FTC probably cost them time they would have spent thinking through the people and studio implications. It was just kind of this perfect storm that happened after they thought the Activision Blizzard acquisition was a good idea and the conditions were ideal for that, and then those conditions suddenly completely shifted when everything started to slow down in terms of hardware sales and in terms of Game Pass subscriptions, you name it. And it's completely fucked them. Now I look at this page right here where Xbox highlights all of their game studios, and I am here just kind of seeing what I can X out. You know, we can already X out Roundhouse, Alpha Dog, Tango, Arcane Austin. But what about Machine Games? What about id? What about Obsidian? What about Ninja Theory? Ninja Theory in particular is one that I think people are holding their breath for, because this is kind of one of those smaller studios who are making, I mean, Hellblade 2 looks like a AAA game, but they're selling it for $50. It's digital only. It's only like 8 hours long, and it's kind of being advertised, and like it was very clearly put out there that this is a smaller game, even though it's got really great graphics fidelity. The marketing for it has been pretty subpar. People are fearing that even if it does well enough, it's not going to be enough, kind of like Hi-Fi Rush. If Hi-Fi Rush can not be enough to keep Tango Gameworks in play, then can Hellblade 2 be enough to keep Ninja Theory in play? Will Hellblade 2 contribute enough? I get the feeling that this page right here, when it's updated months or years down the line, it's going to look very different. It's going to look a lot lonelier and emptier. And it sucks that we're in this situation. It sucks to see the Xbox business just sort of so thoroughly mishandled. This just does not feel like the same Xbox anymore. This just feels like Microsoft and Xbox are going the Sega route with their gaming division. I get the feeling that they're going to lean more towards sort of the Activision model of putting out the most high-profile, trend-chasing, big-budget AAA games possible that can maximize potential profits, and they're not going to leave a lot of room for the smaller studios to get creative and really be inventive in a way that will drive innovation in gaming and that will allow these studios to be nurtured in a way where over the long term they can become those big, mega hit developers. I don't know, man. I'm afraid for how the future will play out for Xbox right now. I suppose only time will tell. In the meantime, though, this is the latest you need to know about the Microsoft and Xbox situation, the shifting tide surrounding this organization, and the unfortunate shutdown of beloved studios like Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on how this situation is developing, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.